Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to launch a new series that I hope that you will enjoy. And a lot of what I'm here for typically is gear-oriented, obviously, and I am going to highlight a little bit of gear stuff here today. But I also know that there are those of you that just like looking at photos and maybe would like some tips along the way. And so this series is going to be called All About the Photos. And so while I will highlight a little bit of gear talk and maybe reference you to another source where you can get more of the gear information, I'm also going to show you a lot of the photos that I've taken in a certain setting. In this case, it's a recent wedding that I just shot. And so I wanted to highlight for you the gear that I took as a part of my arsenal for that day, but mostly to show you photos that I took as a part of that. And so if you want more information on the gear side, I wrote a blog post that I'll throw a link to in the description down below. And you can check out that blog post and get more of the tips and information and how I used gear and what I used it for along the way. But just to highlight what I took into battle on that particular day is that I did actually have 3 different camera bodies in use, but one of mine was more for a second shooter. And so I primarily shot with the Sony A7R Mark III and the Canon 5D Mark IV. And so I shot full frame cameras for that and for different purposes. Now, obviously, a lot of my gear originally was for Canon. And so, for example, my flash units, I use the Metz 64 AF1 flashes. You can find my review of them if you search for it. But those are kind of my staples, but they're set up primarily for, well, they're Canon oriented. And so what I have done since adding Sony is that I just added a second, I just used, fairly cheap command modules. These are the Yongnuo YN622C-TX command unit. And so that allows me to just control the output of various flashes, wirelessly. It goes onto the hot shoe of the camera. And then I use these flash receivers / triggers. And so for a long time, I typically manually control the output of what I'm shooting. Anyway, I shoot in HSS mode. And so fortunately, it works just as well shooting off of a Sony body as it does with a Canon body. And so I just keep one of these controllers on each camera body and I set up the different groups. And then what I typically do is have the flash mounted on one of these with a flash modifier. I use the Light Genius Super Scoop. Again, you can find a review of that here on my channel. And so I typically either have an assistant or a couple assistants or even some volunteers from the crowd shooting up into that, and I just kind of place them where I want them. And so rather than, I used to mess with light stands and try to bring that along, I found that I wasted too much time in trying to get them in position, get them anchored down, not blow over, all of that. And so I just do it that way. That way I'm completely free in my movement. I'm not tethered to anything, and I wirelessly trigger that. So let's look at some photos. And so on the 5D Mark IV, which is my workhorse for shooting weddings, I used 2 primary lenses for different purposes. The first of those is Canon's excellent 35mm f1.4L Mark II. It's just a great portrait wedding glass for that wider angle of view. So here's a look at some of the photos that I took using the 35mm f1.4L2. The second lens that I utilized is kind of my workhorse for shooting events, and that is Tamron's 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 G2 lens. It's an excellent lens, delivers really good results, good autofocus, and of course it's an excellent price, and so its value to performance proposition is excellent. Here's some photos that I took using that lens. Now on the A7R Mark III, I actually shot with 3 different lenses. For a lot of shots, I used the very excellent Sony Zeiss planar 50mm f1.4. This is really my favorite of the 50mm options I've used for any system, and here's some of the photos that I took with that. Now, when I wanted to go with a wider angle point of view, I like the compact nature of the Laowa 15mm f2. It's also a good lens for this kind of application because it has such incredibly low distortion. And so it makes a great option for shooting in those kinds of situations. And so here's some of the photos that I took with the Laowa 15mm on the A7R III. Now, some of my favorite photos of the day come from this bit of glass right here that I recently reviewed, and that's the Voigtlander APO-Lanthar. This is a 65mm f2 macro lens. And as I mentioned, I love the versatility of it, but I really, really love the photos that it produces. This just has they have a stunning clarity to them. And so here's a few of those photos to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. And so there you have it. There are some photos that I took from that day. And if you'd like more of that information about, how I utilize the gear, you can look in the description down below and look at the link to the blog post that I did about that. Of course, also in that description down below, I do have links to some of this gear if you'd like to purchase some of it for yourself. And of course, there also you can follow me on social media. You can become a subscriber here on YouTube. And I would also appreciate it if you would sound off in the comments down below and let me know if you'd like to see more of this kind of episode in the future. I do have another one planned for the near future where I'll highlight a recent kind of travel slash corporate type gig that I did and show you the kind of photos that I took as a part of that. Thanks for watching today. Have a great day.